In the center of the restaurant, glowing with Christmas lights, Finn Archer quietly slipped a small cake before his son, Otis Archer, during his brief break. Father and son lit a single candle, smiling softly as though hiding the entire world. At the table by the window, Vivian Sterling, the CEO who always dined in silence, suddenly froze, her knife and fork suspended. For the first time in 10 years, she saw Christmas truly exist, and she whispered, her voice trembling, "Can I join you?" The restaurant had been open since 1973, a cornerstone establishment on the east side of the city where old brick walls met floor-to-ceiling windows of new glass. It had weathered recessions and renovations, maintaining its reputation as the place where families came for occasions that mattered. On Christmas Eve, it transformed into something that belonged on a postcard sent from a better, gentler world. Garlands of fresh pine draped across exposed wooden beams, filling the air with the scent of forest and winter. Red candles flickered on every table, their flames reflected in polished silverware and crystal glasses. The pianist in the corner, an elderly man who had played here for 23 years, moved through Silent Night with the kind of reverence that made even the busiest servers pause for half a measure, their trays balanced, their rushing stilled by muscle memory of beauty. The dining room was full to capacity. Families crowded around large tables, children in their holiday finest, velvet dresses and tiny bow ties, faces flushed with excitement and sugar from hot chocolate topped with miniature marshmallows. Grandparents raised glasses of wine that caught the candlelight like rubies, toasting to health and happiness and the blessing of another year together. Laughter rose and fell in waves that crashed against the brick walls and rolled back softer, kinder. The sound of silverware against porcelain created a rhythm that spoke of abundance, of togetherness, of everything the season promised to those who had people to share it with. Conversations overlapped in a symphony of connection, children pleading for one more breadstick, mothers reminding them to use napkins, fathers telling the same stories they told every year because tradition mattered more than novelty. Finn Archer moved through this world like a shadow, present but unnoticed, essential but invisible. At 36, he had worked at the restaurant for 4 years, first as a server when he desperately needed any job that would let him support his son, then taking on maintenance work when the night manager discovered he could fix a broken espresso machine with nothing but a screwdriver. Patience and knowledge inherited from a father who had worked as a mechanic before arthritis claimed his hands. Finn wore the standard uniform black slacks purchased from a discount store where he checked the clearance rack every 2 weeks, and a white shirt that he pressed himself every Sunday evening using the iron that had belonged to his late wife, moving the metal across fabric in the same careful pattern she had taught him during their first month of marriage. His hands were clean but rough, calloused across the palms, with small scars from 100 minor repairs, the kind of hands that knew work intimately and had made peace with it. Tonight, like every Christmas Eve for the past 3 years, he had asked the manager for permission to let Otis sit in the small alcove near the kitchen, that forgotten space between the bright dining room and the fluorescent chaos of the dish pit, the place where servers took their breaks and ate hurried meals standing up. The manager, Helen, a tired woman of 52 with 3 teenagers of her own and eyes that had seen too many single parents struggle, had looked at Finn's face, the hope mixed with resignation, the expectation of rejection softened by gratitude for whatever kindness might come, and simply nodded. She understood. Some things mattered more than policy. Otis sat on a folding chair, his feet dangling 6 inches from the floor, shoes that were slightly too big because Finn had bought them a size up so they would last through spring. He wore a paper Santa hat he had made himself at school during the last week before winter break. The construction paper carefully folded and stapled, the cotton ball at the tip slightly lopsided but attached with enough glue to survive the walk from school to the restaurant in his backpack. In his lap, he held a small notebook with a blue cover, pages filled with drawings of snowmen and stars and houses with smoke curling from chimneys, the kind of houses he saw on television but had never lived in. He was the kind of child who understood things without being told, who had learned before kindergarten that Christmas at the restaurant meant his father could keep his job, that the small cake was enough, that love sometimes wore the uniform of sacrifice and late-night shifts and presents that came wrapped in newspaper because wrapping paper cost $3 a roll. Vivian Sterling occupied table 17, the corner spot by the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the street where taxis and cars passed in streams of red and white light. She was 34 years old and had built an empire in commercial real estate, the kind of woman whose name appeared in the business section of newspapers above words like visionary and ruthless and unstoppable. At 28, she had purchased her first building with a loan that would have crushed most people. At 30, she had turned that building into 5. Now she owned properties in 7 states, each one managed with the same cold efficiency that had made her successful and utterly alone. She came to this restaurant 3 times a week, always alone, always ordering the same thing: grilled salmon with no sauce, because she did not trust her body to digest rich food after years of eating meals from her desk, steamed vegetables cut into uniform pieces, a single glass of white wine that she sipped exactly 3 times before abandoning. The servers knew not to make small talk. The manager knew to seat her away from families, away from celebrations, away from anything that might remind her of what she did not have. Tonight, she wore a charcoal cashmere sweater that had cost $800, but felt like any other sweater, and pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother, one of the few people who had loved her without conditions, who had died when Vivian was 14 and left behind a silence that still echoed. Her table was set for 1. It was always set for 1, with a single napkin folded into the shape of a swan, a single water glass perspiring gently in the warm room, a single menu that she never opened because she always ordered the same thing, as if variety might introduce chaos into a life built on control and predictability. The restaurant breathed with warmth and noise and the complicated beauty of human connection. At table 4, a family of 8 sang Happy Birthday to a little girl who stood on her chair to blow out 5 pink candles on a chocolate cake. Her face scrunched in concentration, her wish whispered so quietly only she would ever know what she had asked for. At table 9, a couple in their 70s held hands across the tablecloth embroidered with holly leaves, their fingers intertwined like roots grown together over decades, the wedding rings worn smooth by time and devotion. At table 12, 3 generations shared stories that made them lean in close, conspirators in their own joy, grandchildren hearing for the 100th time about the blizzard of 1988, or the Thanksgiving turkey that caught fire, or the uncle who showed up to his own wedding in fishing waders because he had lost track of time at the lake. The contrast was stark enough to hurt. 1 room, 2 worlds existing in parallel dimensions that never touched. Tables filled with noise and light and belonging, where people laughed too loud and talked with their mouths full and reached across plates to steal French fries from each other because that was what family meant. And then, table 17, where Vivian Sterling cut her salmon into precise 1-inch squares and chewed each bite exactly 20 times, a habit she had developed at boarding school, when eating was just another task to complete efficiently, when dining halls were places to survive rather than enjoy, when she had learned that if you ate quickly enough, you could leave before anyone noticed you were alone. Finn's break came at 8:30, right between the dinner rush when the kitchen moved like a machine, and the late crowd who would arrive after theater performances and holiday parties ended. He had 45 minutes before he would need to be back on the floor, clearing tables and refilling water glasses and answering the same questions about tonight's specials that he had answered 200 times already. He walked to the alcove where Otis waited, carrying the small white bakery box he had picked up on the way to work, stopping at the discount store on Lexington where they marked down day-old items at 5 in the evening. Inside was a cupcake from the clearance rack, chocolate with vanilla frosting, reduced from $3 to $1.50 because the frosting had smeared slightly during the day, creating a small imperfection that made it unsellable at full price, but perfectly fine for a 7-year-old boy who would not care if the swirl was crooked. Finn had smoothed it as best he could with the back of a plastic knife from the break room, trying to make it look intentional, like he had chosen this design specifically. Now, he set it in front of his son like it was something precious, like it was a layered cake from the French bakery downtown where a single slice cost more than Finn's hourly wage. From his pocket, he produced a single birthday candle, white and thin, the kind that came in a package of 50 for $2 at the grocery store, the kind he bought once a year and rationed for small celebrations, Otis's actual birthday in March, and Christmas, and sometimes on Fridays when the week had been particularly hard, and they both needed a reminder that small joys still existed in a world that often felt designed to crush them. Otis looked up at his father. His eyes, the same hazel as Finn's, the same eyes that had belonged to Finn's own mother who had died when he was 12, held something ancient and young at the same time, a wisdom that came from watching his father work 3 jobs to keep them fed, mixed with the innocence of a child who still believed that goodness would be rewarded. "Is it okay to do this here?" he whispered, his voice barely audible above the distant clatter of dishes and the muffled sounds of celebration from the dining room. "We'll be quick," Finn said. He struck a match from a book he had taken from the bar, the kind with the restaurant's logo printed on the front. The match hissed to life, sulfur sharp in his nostrils. He cupped his hand around the flame to shield it from the draft that came from the kitchen door, swinging open and closed, as servers rushed between worlds. He touched the match to the wick. The candle caught, burning steady and bright. A single point of light in the dim alcove that smelled of industrial soap and fryer oil, and underneath it all, the faint scent of cinnamon from someone's discarded hot chocolate. They sat together in that small space between the kitchen and the dining room, between the clatter of dishes being washed by men who spoke Spanish and laughed at jokes. Finn did not understand, and the murmur of satisfied customers who would leave generous tips because Christmas made people feel wealthy even when they were not. Otis began to hum Jingle Bells under his breath, a sound so soft it might have been mistaken for the building settling or the hum of the industrial refrigerator in the back. Finn hummed along, his voice slightly off-key but earnest. For 3 minutes and 40 seconds, they existed in a bubble of their own making. A private world where poverty did not matter because they had each other, where a $1.50 cupcake tasted like a feast because it was shared with love. "Dad," Otis said, his voice barely audible, fragile as spun glass. "I'm sorry we can't go home and have a big dinner like other families." Finn reached across the small plastic table and took his son's hand. The boy's fingers were cold despite the warmth of the restaurant. Always cold because he was too small to generate enough body heat because the winter coat Finn had bought him from the thrift store was good but not great, serviceable but not perfect. His throat tightened with the familiar ache of wanting to give his son the world and having only a cupcake to offer. "Otis, listen to me. You are my family. Sitting here with you is the best Christmas I could ask for, but I didn't get you anything." Otis's eyes dropped to the table. All the other kids at school were talking about the presents they bought their parents. Timothy got his mom a necklace. Sarah made her dad a picture frame. "I didn't have money for anything. You're here. That's everything." Finn squeezed his son's hand gently. "You know what the best present is? Having someone who wants to spend time with you. Everything else is just stuff. You are the gift, Otis. You always have been." Otis smiled, small and certain, the kind of smile that came from a deep well of trust. He leaned forward, closed his eyes for 3 full seconds like he was making a wish he truly believed would come true, and blew out the candle. The smoke curled upward in a thin ribbon, disappearing into the restaurant's warm air, carrying whatever hope a 7-year-old boy had whispered into the darkness. From table 17, Vivian Sterling watched it all. She had not meant to. She had been cutting another piece of salmon when the small movement in her peripheral vision caught her attention. A man and a boy huddled over something tiny. A candle. A song hummed so quietly she could not make out the melody. The joy on the child's face when he blew out the flame. The way the man's shoulders relaxed, just for a moment, as if he had given his son the world. Something in Vivian's chest cracked. It was a small sound, like ice breaking on a frozen lake when spring first arrives. She set down her fork. She could not remember the last time she had attended a celebration. Business dinners, yes. Charity galas where she wrote checks and left before dessert. But an actual celebration, the kind where people meant what they said when they clinged glasses? She could not remember. Her parents had divorced when she was 6. Her father remarried and started a new family. Her mother moved to Europe and sent birthday cards that arrived 3 weeks late. Vivian had learned early that achievement was something you could control. Success had rules. Loneliness just was. But watching that father and son, Vivian felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in a decade. Envy. Not for money or status, she had those. Envy for the simple fact of being wanted, of having someone wait for you, of mattering in a way that had nothing to do with quarterly earnings or shareholder value. She lifted her hand. The server, a young woman named Claire, appeared instantly. "Yes, Miss Sterling? That man?" Vivian said, nodding toward the alcove. "Is he a guest?" Claire followed her gaze. "That's Finn. He works here, server and maintenance. That's his son, Otis." Vivian's hand went to her wine glass. She did not drink. She set it down. "Does he often bring his son to work?" "Only on holidays. He's a single dad. Can't afford a sitter, I think. Helen lets him as long as the boy stays out of the way." Vivian nodded slowly. She looked at her plate. Half the salmon remained. She had no appetite. For 10 years, she had eaten Christmas dinner alone in this restaurant, because it was open, because it was neutral territory, because going home to her empty penthouse apartment felt worse. She had told herself it was a choice. Now, watching a man who had so little create something so whole, she understood it had been a lie. She stood. The movement was sudden enough that Claire stepped back. "Miss Sterling? Is everything all right? I need to speak with him." "With Finn?" "Yes." Claire's expression shifted to concern. "Did he do something wrong?" "No." Vivian's voice was firm. "Nothing wrong." She crossed the dining room. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor. Conversations did not pause. She was not famous in the way actors or athletes were famous, but a few heads turned. She was aware of her own strangeness. A woman in expensive cashmere walking toward the service alcove like she had business there. Finn looked up. He was in the process of putting the candle back in his pocket. Otis held the cupcake in both hands, careful not to smudge the frosting. For a moment, Finn's face showed confusion, then worry. In his experience, when someone from the dining room approached him, it meant a complaint. He stood quickly. "Can I help you with something, ma'am?" Vivian stopped 3 feet away. Up close, she could see the wear in his shirt collar, the careful way it had been mended. She could see the tiredness around his eyes, the kind that came from working double shifts and still coming up short. She opened her mouth to speak, and found that the words she had prepared something polite and distant would not come. Instead, she said, "Are you celebrating Christmas?" Otis looked at his father, then at the woman. He nodded. Something in the child's formality, the way he called her ma'am, like he had been taught to respect adults, undid Vivian completely. She felt her eyes sting. She blinked rapidly. "It looks lovely." Finn's posture relaxed slightly. "Thank you. We were just finishing up." "I don't mean to intrude," Vivian said. The words came out halting, unpracticed. "But I was wondering." She stopped. This was absurd. She was a woman who negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching. She could not ask a simple question. "Would it be all right if I joined you?" Finn stared at her. Otis tilted his head, his paper Santa hat shifting to one side. "Join us?" Finn repeated. "For Christmas," Vivian clarified. Her voice was barely above a whisper now. "I don't have anyone to celebrate with, and you both look so happy." "I just thought," she stopped again. "I'm sorry. This is inappropriate." "Forget," I asked. She turned to leave, but Otis spoke up, his voice clear and certain. "You can sit with us. We have an extra chair." Vivian looked at the boy. He was pointing to a third folding chair leaning against the wall. His expression was open, guileless. He smiled at her the way children smile before the world teaches them to be suspicious. Finn glanced at his son, then at Vivian. He saw something in her face that he recognized. It was the same thing he saw in his own mirror on the mornings when Otis was still asleep and the apartment was too quiet. Loneliness, the kind that no amount of money or success could fill. "It's not much," Finn said slowly. "But you're welcome to join us." Vivian's breath caught. Finn unfolded the third chair. Vivian sat down. The alcove was small, meant for one person on break, maybe two if they were friendly. With 3 people, their knees nearly touched. The plastic table between them could barely hold the cupcake and Otis's notebook. But Vivian sat as if it were the finest seat she had ever occupied. Otis, ever the host, pushed the cupcake toward her. "Would you like some?" "I couldn't," Vivian said. "That's yours. Dad says sharing makes things better." Vivian looked at Finn. He shrugged, a small movement that said he had taught his son this because it was true. She carefully broke off a small piece of the cupcake. The frosting was sweet, the kind of sweet that came from a discount bakery. But it tasted like something more. She ate it slowly. Otis began to talk. He told her about his school, about the snowflake craft he made in art class, about his teacher, Mrs. Patterson, who let him read chapter books during quiet time. Finn sat quietly, watching his son with the kind of attention that made it clear this child was the center of his universe. Vivian listened. She asked questions. She laughed when Otis described the classroom hamster who escaped and was found sleeping in the principal's inbox. For 20 minutes, Vivian Sterling forgot that she was a CEO, forgot that she owned buildings in 7 states, forgot that her calendar was booked 3 months in advance. She was just a woman sitting at a folding table with a father and son, eating a shared cupcake, listening to a 7-year-old boy talk about his life. Then someone recognized her. It happened quickly. A man at table 8 stood to use the restroom. He walked past the alcove and did a double take. "Miss Sterling?" he said, his voice loud enough to carry. Vivian looked up. She recognized him vaguely, an investor she had met at a conference. His name escaped her. "I thought that was you," he beamed. "Having dinner with the staff? That's very generous of you." The word generous hung in the air like an accusation. Vivian's face went pale. Around them, other diners began to turn. Whispers started. A few people pulled out their phones, not to take pictures, but to search her name, to confirm. The manager, Helen, appeared from the kitchen, her expression tight with concern. Finn understood immediately what was happening. This was not just a lonely woman joining a Christmas celebration. This was Vivian Sterling. The Vivian Sterling, the woman whose face appeared on the covers of business magazines. The woman who had just acquired the building that housed this very restaurant. And she was sitting in a service alcove with one of her employees, eating a discount cupcake like it was normal. Finn stood abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor. Vivian stood as well. "Finn, please, did you think this was amusing?" His words came out harder than he intended. "Slumming it with the working class on Christmas Eve?" Otis looked between them, confused and frightened by the sudden change in his father's tone. "No," Vivian said quickly. "That's not what this was." "Then what was it?" Finn's hands clenched at his sides. A photo opportunity? A story you'll tell at your next board meeting? Vivian's face crumpled. She reached for her purse, a practiced motion, the instinct to smooth things over with money. But Finn's expression stopped her. I don't want your charity, he said quietly. I wasn't offering charity. I was asking for company. It's the same thing when you're you and I'm me. Vivian looked at him, then at Otis, who had shrunk back in his chair. His paper Santa hat now crumpled in his small fists. She felt the entire restaurant watching. She felt the weight of her own name, her own success, crushing the one genuine moment she had experienced in years. I'm sorry, she whispered. Then she turned and walked away. She did not return to table 17. She collected her coat from the hostess stand and left through the front door. The cold December air hit her face like a slap. She stood on the sidewalk, her breath misting in the streetlights, and realized she was crying. Inside, Finn sat back down. He put his head in his hands. Helen approached cautiously. You okay? I'm fine. You want to take the rest of the night off? I need the hours. Helen nodded and walked away. Otis tugged on his father's sleeve. Dad, why did you yell at her? I didn't yell. You were mad. Finn looked at his son. I was. I thought she was making fun of us. She wasn't making fun, Otis said, with the certainty of childhood. She was lonely. The words landed like stones. Finn replayed the conversation in his mind. The way Vivian's hands had shaken when she asked to join them. The way she had listened to Otis like every word mattered. The way she had broken off the smallest piece of cupcake like she was afraid of taking too much. He had seen judgment where there had been only loneliness. I think you're right, Finn said softly. Then why did she leave? Because I made her feel bad. Otis frowned. You should say sorry. I don't think I'll get the chance. The rest of Finn's shift passed in a blur. He cleared tables, refilled water glasses, helped the dishwasher fix a clogged drain. Otis fell asleep in the alcove, his head pillowed on his arms. At 11:45, Helen told Finn he could go. The restaurant would close at midnight. Finn carried Otis to the employee area to get their coats. When he returned to the dining room, he stopped. Vivian Sterling was standing near table 17. She was not sitting. She was just standing there, her coat buttoned, her purse clutched in both hands, like she had been waiting. Finn approached slowly. Miss Sterling? She turned. Her eyes were red. I came back to apologize. You don't need to. I do. She took a breath. I'm sorry for putting you in that position. I wasn't thinking about how it would look. I was just, her voice broke. I saw you with your son, and I wanted to feel that. Just for a minute. I wanted to know what it was like to be part of something. Finn set Otis down gently in a nearby chair. The boy stirred, but did not wake. I'm the one who should apologize. I accused you of things that weren't true. You were protecting your son. That's not something to apologize for. They stood in silence. The restaurant was nearly empty now. The pianist had left. The last few servers were stacking chairs. Outside, snow had begun to fall, light and delicate, the kind that disappeared the moment it touched the ground. Otis woke up. He rubbed his eyes and saw Vivian. His face lit up. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the paper Santa hat. It was wrinkled and slightly torn, but he held it out to her. You forgot this. Vivian stared at the hat. I didn't. I made it for you, Otis said, so you could be part of our Christmas party. Vivian took the hat with shaking hands. She put it on her head. The cotton ball hung limply to one side, and then she cried. Not the careful, controlled tears of earlier, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place she had locked away for decades. She covered her face with her hands, ashamed of the rawness of it. Otis got up and hugged her waist. Finn stepped forward, awkward but genuine, and put a hand on her shoulder. They stood like that, three people who barely knew each other, connected by the simplest and most profound of human needs, the need not to be alone. When Vivian's crying subsided, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I don't know how to let people in." "None of us really do," Finn said. "We just try." Vivian looked at him. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course. I grew up in boarding schools. My parents were always traveling, always busy. I learned early that if I wanted love, I had to earn it with achievements. Straight A's, awards, success. I've been chasing that my whole life. But tonight, sitting with you both, I realized something." She paused. "You can't earn belonging. It's just given, or it's not." Finn thought about his own life. His wife had left when Otis was 2, unable to handle the stress of a special needs child. Otis had asthma that sometimes required hospital stays. Finn had chosen his son over everything else. He had given up a better-paying job that required travel. He had learned to budget in ways that would have seemed impossible before, but he had never once regretted it, because Otis looked at him like he had hung the moon. "You're right," Finn said. "It's not earned. It's just there, if you're lucky enough to find it." Vivian straightened. She was still wearing the paper Santa hat. "I want to do something for you both." "Not charity," she added quickly when Finn opened his mouth. "Something that matters." Over the next few weeks, Vivian kept her word. She did not write Finn a check. She did not offer him a job he had not earned. Instead, she used her position as the building's owner to require the restaurant to improve its employee conditions. Paid sick leave, health insurance, a living wage. Helen, the manager, was promoted to general manager with a salary that let her worry less about her own children. The changes affected everyone, not just Finn. Finn saw Vivian 3 more times over the winter. Once, she came to the restaurant for dinner and sat at table 17, but this time she invited Finn and Otis to join her on his break. They talked about ordinary things, the weather, a movie Otis wanted to see, a recipe Vivian had tried and failed to cook. Another time, she attended one of Otis's school concerts, sitting in the back row, clapping loudly when he sang his solo. The third time, she helped Finn fix the heat in his apartment building by calling the landlord herself and threatening a lawsuit. She did not tell Finn about the call. He only found out when his landlord mentioned it bitterly. Vivian learned, slowly, how to be present. How to call Finn just to ask how his day went. How to remember Otis's favorite color and bring him a blue baseball cap without making it a production. How to sit in comfortable silence without filling every moment with productivity. A year later, on Christmas Eve, the 3 of them sat at table 17. It was no longer set for one. The restaurant had a new policy. Employees and their families were welcome to dine there on holidays at a significant discount. Finn had used the policy to reserve the table weeks in advance. Otis, now 8, wore the same paper Santa hat, carefully preserved and reinforced with tape. Vivian wore a red sweater instead of her usual charcoal. Finn had bought a new shirt for the occasion, though he still pressed it himself. They ordered too much food and shared everything. They laughed when Otis knocked over his water glass and Finn caught it mid-fall. They sang Happy Birthday when the servers brought out a cake for a little girl at table 4, joining in like they were part of her family too. Near the end of the meal, Vivian set down her fork and looked at Finn and Otis. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" Finn asked. "For giving me a place at the table." Otis grinned. "You're always welcome here." Vivian smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes and changed her entire face. She looked younger, lighter, like she had set down a burden she had been carrying for 30 years. "And that's the greatest gift I've ever received." Outside, snow fell in earnest, blanketing the city in white. Inside, the restaurant glowed with warmth and light and the sound of people who had chosen each other, not because of money or status or obligation, but because loneliness recognized loneliness and decided, against all odds, to try something different. Christmas, Vivian had learned, was not found at the VIP table. It was found wherever someone waited for you, wherever someone saved you a chair, wherever someone said, without hesitation and without conditions, "You can sit with us." And for the first time in her life, she had.